The full article with screenshots was originally posted on the game design blog Significant Bits. Unfortunately, Gamasutra no longer allows hot linking of non-HTTPS images, so only the charts are included here. Having grown up with JRPGs, it's somewhat surprising how rarely I play them these days. That desire for a wondrous epic is still there, but pursuing new titles usually results in a feeling of slogging through manufactured bloat. The introductory segments are often filled with painfully gated progression, over-enthusiastic tutorials, and a juvenile narrative. In the limited instances where the opening is great, the overall game loop tends to splinter out into protracted tedium. In either case, I quickly lose interest. This general reaction to modern jerks must have a lot to do with growing up and having less free time, a lower tolerance for anime tropes, and no emotional attachment to the new series. But has not the genre improved overall? Were not the older games just grindfests burdened with copious amounts of random battles? To help answer that question, I thought it would be interesting to quantify some of the less subjective elements of JRPGs, starting with the fourth generation of consoles. My approach was to replay the first 2 hours of the more renowned JRPGs released in North America, and measure the amount of time it took to reach various gameplay milestones in each one. To avoid the more contentious titles occasionally placed under the JRPG umbrella, I only included games with multiple controllable party members, a turn-based battle system, and a character-driven narrative. Despite having played many of these games in the past, I only had a vague recollection of most, and attempted to emulate a first-time completionist experience. I talked to every IP, entered every building, brought up every menu, and skipped no cutscenes or dialogue. I did, however, increase text display and walking speeds wherever possible. My main goal was to measure 2 elements: time to freedom, TTF, and time to comfort, T. I define time to freedom as the first time the player gets to interact with the game in any way beyond simply advancing cutscenes, and time to comfort as the amount of time it takes to experience all applicable gameplay milestones within a 2-hour limit. These 2 metrics are meant to show how quickly the player can start experimenting with the game, and how long it takes to experience its main mechanics and gain a certain sense of mastery over them. Additionally, I noted each game's freedom to comfort, FTC, defined as the difference between T and TTF. The common gameplay milestones consisted of the following. A few other elements such as vehicles and mini-games were not included, as they were either not common enough, or typically appeared in the mid to late stages of a game. In addition, I provided a bit of context for each title, highlighting what made it stand out from other JRPGs, and contributed a bit of analysis on the milestone results. Finally, I am limiting each console cycle to 10 games and sorting them chronologically by original release date, usually in Japan, in order to give a better idea of the genre's progression. My first JRPG got a landmark title in the genre. It injected a bit of dynamism to turn-based combat via the active time battle system, and managed to take a narrative step forward by creating plot-related story arcs for all party members. It's also known for having a fairly brisk pace, partially credited to lots of content being cut. Further kits were made to the North American release, removing various items and character skills. But even this eroded version was ultimately doomed as too complex by SQUARESOFT. Consequently, this led to the development of the much maligned Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. In order to introduce JRPGs to the West, Mystic Quest fared even worse. But eventually Final Fantasy IV gained enough popularity to warrant various re-releases. The remake, and even an episodic, albeit not as fondly received, sequel. I remembered Final Fantasy VI's intro as rather long, but apparently it did not even last 5 minutes. Part of this might be the fact that dialogue pop-ups, usually located at the top of the screen, not the bottom, appear without any delays, and multiple characters' lines can be displayed in the box at one time. The TTF is still a bit deceptive, as once the mobility milestone is hit, the player has to sit through various cutscenes and expository sequences before being deposited on the overworld map. Once the restraints are fully off, FIF hits an excellent place in terms of both gameplay and narrative. Random battles are fairly frequent, but running away is always an option with the additional risk of losing money, and level grinding is not required. Party members come and go very quickly, and the plot continuously unfolds at each turn. The only outlier is the first equipment upgrade that comes unusually late, as the weapons armor shop is closed in the first town, and there's no gear to collect in the first dungeon.
FTC 32-43.
Miscellaneous points. I was a little surprised to see the original Lunar appear solely on the list, but in retrospect it makes sense. By 1991, various multimedia heavy games such as Cosmic Fantasy were coming out on Japanese PCs and the CD-ROM system. Lunar TC was the Mega CD's flagship, and its North American publisher, Working Designs, created a pod known for a fair amount of changes. Extra humor and pop culture references were sprinkled in, and the packaging itself included various extras to position it as a premium title. The Silver Star was successful enough to turn Luna into a franchise, spawning a sequel, various spin-offs, and multiple ports and remakes. Despite the multimedia experience being a large selling point, Lunar TC started off fairly quickly, mainly due to its voiced and animated intro playing before the title screen. From there, it took very little time to get some items, a few companions, and go out exploring. Menus and dialogues displayed instantly, so there were no unnecessary delays. Although movement was a bit tricky as the game auto-pathed whenever the party ran into a collidable obstacle, keeping a direction pressed down made the party hug the wall and keep going, making it at times difficult to properly line up with interactive elements such as NPCs and treasure chests, especially when they were close together. Combat included movement and attack animations, so it was a bit slower than its contemporaries. But it did not drag on with overly involved spell sequences. Random encounters were truly random in terms of frequency, but the overworld was littered with HPMP, restoring statues, so I was never in any real danger. Lunar TC only outlier was its first boss battle, which came fairly late into the game. It was also quite difficult and required a bit of grinding, as the boss was only susceptible to magic, and the protagonist unlocked his spell potential right before the boss engine. The remakes of the game changed this up quite a bit, adding more boss battles and altering the narrative-driven party composition.
FTC 1:51:16.
Miscellaneous points. Fantasy Star was Sega's main jerk. Their other console, the Mega Drive, and the end of the millennium, was the final entry in the series. Despite not relying on a CD-ROM for storage, it featured lots of animated characters and enemies, and copious amounts of pixel art stills. Its manga-esque cinematic sequences, the high production values and epic scope, did a lot to wash away the negative reception of Fantasy started. But it was not enough to keep the series going. The Fantasy Star Rip was eventually used again, but this time for a series of real-time, SCART-based online games rather than a traditional PSIV's dialogues were printed out one letter at a time in a text box that was only 2 lines high. Its menus popped up one above the other and all closed individually when dismissed, and much of the environment could be investigated for flavor text that bogged down a completionist playthrough. Despite all these elements, PSIV was the second fastest game to hit all the milestones, and it could be easily taken first spot if I had played the games slightly differently. The intro was brisk and started the player off in a town with an inn, an item shop,